Nobody warns you that raising a daughter to be strong enough to leave you is the same thing as raising her to be strong enough to disappear. I didn't understand that until I was 62 years old, standing in a kitchen that used to be full of noise, holding a phone with a message on it that didn't make any sense yet. It would. Give it a few weeks. But right now, in this moment I want to tell you about, I still thought I was just a father waiting for his daughter to call him back. My, my name is Walter Kowalski. Folks around Cedar Falls, Iowa, just call me Walt. I spent 38 years running a family hardware and lumber supply company my own father started in 1961. The kind of place where the same customers have been walking through the door since before I could see over the counter. I took it over when I was 29. My wife, Ruth, kept the books until her hands got too stiff for it. We raised 2 kids in a house on Maple Ridge Road with a porch swing that's outlived 3 dogs and 1 bad roof. We're not fancy people, my grandson, and I say that with pride, not apology. We go to Trinity Lutheran on Sundays. We eat pot roast on the first Sunday of the month because that's when my brother Frank and his wife drive up from Waterloo, and Frank has never once in his life called ahead before showing up. Family is not a suggestion in this house. It is the whole point. So, when I tell you that my daughter Claire, my only daughter, stopped being able to look me in the eye somewhere around her 30th birthday, I need you to understand what that meant to a man like me. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing that breaks a family ever happens all at once. It happens in pieces so small you keep finding reasons to ignore them because the alternative is admitting that something you love is already gone and you just haven't buried it yet. Claire was smart. Valedictorian smart. She got into a marketing program at a university, 2 states over, and I paid for every semester without blinking. Because that's what you do for your children when you've spent your whole life making sure the store never went under during a bad harvest year. After school, she moved to Chicago. Then she stopped calling every Sunday. Then it was every other Sunday. Then it was a text on my birthday that just said, "Happy birthday, Dad. Love you," with nothing behind it, no phone call, no visit, nothing you could hold on to. 3 years ago, she called to tell me she was engaged. His name was Preston Hale, and he ran some kind of investment consulting firm in Chicago. I never met him. Not once. Not in 3 years. Every time I brought up driving down, or him coming up here for Sunday dinner, there was always a reason: work trip, his schedule, a gala. My daughter's life had filled up with a vocabulary I didn't recognize, and somewhere in there, I'd started to feel like a stop on a route she was trying to reroute around. Ruth passed 2 years ago this coming November. Ovarian cancer, fast. The kind that doesn't give you time to get your affairs in order the way you'd like. Claire came home for the funeral. She stood at the graveside in a black dress that cost more than I make in 2 months, and she cried, real tears, I could see that. But she left the next morning on the first flight out, and I remember standing in the driveway watching her rental car pull away and thinking, she's already gone. This is just her leaving the second time. After that, the calls slowed to almost nothing. A text here and there. A card at Christmas with her signature and nothing else. No note, like she was checking a box. Then, this past spring, she called and told me she was getting married, September. A venue outside Chicago called the Ashworth Estate, whatever that is. She said it real fast, like she was reading off a script, and right at the end she said something that has sat in my chest like a stone ever since. She said, "Dad, I need you to understand something. It's just going to be a small group of people who really know me now. I don't think it makes sense for you to come." I sat with that phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up. My son, Danny, 3 years younger than Claire, still lives 20 minutes from me with his wife and their 2 boys. He was over that Sunday, and I told him what she'd said, sitting at my own kitchen table, the same table where I taught both my kids to play cribbage. Danny got quiet, which is not like him. He said, "Dad, something is wrong here. That's not just Claire being busy. That's Claire hiding something." I told him I didn't want to believe that. He said, "When has not wanting to believe something ever made it not true?" That sat with me too. I want you to understand something about me, neighbor, before I go any further. I am not a suspicious man. I've run a business on a handshake for 4 decades. I trust people until they give me a real reason not to. But Danny's question kept circling back on me at night, the way a moth keeps circling a porch light even after it's burned itself twice. So, one evening in early July, alone in the house, I did something I'm not proud of and would do again in a heartbeat. I went looking. Claire had built our family's estate paperwork years back when Ruth was first getting sick and we needed everything squared away. Wills, trusts, the works, and Claire, being the organizing type, had set up a shared family portal with the attorney so everybody could see the documents when they needed to. I hadn't logged into that thing in over a year. But I remembered the login, and I remembered that Claire's full legal name was on those old documents, because she'd needed her name notarized for something back then. Claire Elizabeth Kowalski. Except when I searched for wedding registries under that name, under Kowalski, there was nothing, not one hit. No venue confirmation, no gift registry, nothing. So I tried her mother's maiden name instead, on a hunch, because that's the kind of thing people do when they want a name that sounds like it came from somewhere else. Ruth's maiden name was Whitfield. Claire Whitfield. There it was. A full wedding website, professionally built, the kind with a countdown clock and a photo of her and Preston laughing on some pier somewhere. And under the section titled Our Families, there were 2 paragraphs about the Hale family, and then 2 paragraphs about the Whitfield family, describing Claire as the daughter of the late Robert and Margaret Whitfield of Lake Forest, Illinois, both deceased, survived by their loving memory. I read that 3 times before it made sense. My daughter had written her own parents, dead. I sat there at my kitchen table with Ruth's picture on the wall behind me. My Ruth, gone 2 years now, buried 30 miles from this table, and I read that my daughter had assigned her mother's death to a made-up couple with a made-up last name and a made-up town, and had somehow, in the same sentence, made her real living father disappear entirely. Not dead, just gone, unmentioned, unnecessary. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Ruth's old recliner until almost 4 in the morning, running the timeline back and forth in my head like a man trying to find the exact moment a levee gave way. The next morning I called Danny. I read him the website out loud over the phone. There was a long quiet on his end, and then he said, "Dad, I think you need to go down there. I want to be honest with you about something." My first thought wasn't anger. It was something closer to shame. I thought, what did I do wrong that she'd rather invent a dead couple from Lake Forest than tell people her father owns a lumber yard in Cedar Falls? That's the thought that kept me up, not the lie itself, but the question of what about me needed erasing. It took me 4 days of quiet asking around, an old friend from the Rotary Club who does title searches for a living, before I had anything real. Turns out there was no Robert or Margaret Whitfield who'd ever lived in Lake Forest, Illinois, matching that description. Not in any obituary. Not in any property record. Whoever they were built entirely out of thin air, a costume with no person inside it. But I did find something else, something my friend turned up almost as an afterthought. Claire's fiancé, Preston Hale, worked at a wealth advisory firm downtown, and the managing partner there was a man named Gordon Ashcroft. And there was a woman, his wife, Diane Ashcroft, who sat on some charity boards, the kind of woman whose photo shows up in the society pages of a newspaper I'd never in my life have reason to read. I didn't understand yet what that had to do with anything. I would. I drove down to Chicago on a Thursday, at the end of July, told nobody but Danny, and parked outside Claire's apartment building without going in. I just needed to see her life from the outside for a minute. The doorman, the awning, the kind of building where you need a code to get past the lobby. I sat in my truck for the better part of an hour, and then I drove back to the hotel and called the number for the Ashworth Estate, the wedding venue, pretending to be a distant cousin trying to confirm details for a gift. The woman on the phone was kind enough. She mentioned, casually, that the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding would include, and I remember these words exact, a special dinner to formally welcome the bride's parents. I asked, just to be sure, whether that meant the Kowalski side or the Whitfield side, and she paused and said, "I have it down as Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, hosted by the groom's family." So there it was, in the plainest language a stranger could give me. My daughter was not simply omitting me from a guest list. She had built 2 entire human beings to stand in the place where I should have stood, and she had let some other family host a dinner to formally welcome them, whoever they were going to turn out to be. I called Danny that night from the hotel room and told him everything. He went quiet again, and then he said the thing that changed how I approached the rest of this. He said, "Dad, you've spent your whole life being the kind of man that people are proud to stand next to. Don't let her turn you into the mystery she's hiding. Let her stand next to whoever she's hired, and let's see if they can hold up under a room full of people who actually know the truth." That was Danny's idea, not mine, and I want to give him credit for it because I don't think I'd have had it in me on my own. I am, by nature, a patient man. I once waited 11 years for a customer to pay off a debt on a barn raising, because I believed he'd get there eventually, and he did. My father used to say, "The man who reacts first in an argument has already lost it, because he's shown you where he's soft." I decided that night I wasn't going to react. I was going to wait and gather and let Claire finish building whatever she was building, because a lie you catch halfway through is just an accusation. A lie you let run all the way to its end is a confession nobody can argue with. Over the next 2 weeks, I did what any careful man does before a big decision. I asked around, quietly, the way you'd check a foundation before you build on it. Danny drove down one weekend with me, and we found out where Gordon and Diane Ashcroft actually lived. And it wasn't hard. They were listed as hosts of a charity gala coming up, address and all, right there in the newspaper archive. I want to tell you plainly, I did not go there to cause trouble. I went because I needed to understand what kind of people would agree to stand in for a dead couple at their own employee's wedding. I drove out to their neighborhood on a Saturday morning in early August, a part of the North Shore with hedges trimmed like they'd been measured with a ruler, and I sat outside a coffee shop 2 blocks from their house for the better part of a morning, working up the nerve, feeling every bit the out-of-place old man in a truck with Iowa plates that I was. Around 11, I saw a woman come out to get her mail, silver blonde hair, the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of being looked at and never quite letting it show that she noticed. I got out of the truck. I walked up slow, hands where she could see them, the way you'd approach a spooked animal. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm sorry to bother you at your home. My name is Walter Kowalski. I believe you may know my daughter, Claire." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face did a very particular kind of collapsing, not fear, not anger, something closer to a woman realizing a bill has finally come due. "You're her father," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. "The living one, as far as I know." She didn't invite me in. But she didn't ask me to leave either. She stood there on her own driveway holding a stack of catalogs against her chest like a shield, and she told me everything, because I think some part of her had been waiting 2 years for somebody to finally ask. Claire had told them, when she first started at the firm under Preston, that her parents had died in a car accident when she was in her 20s, and that she'd been more or less raised by an aunt who'd since passed as well. Diane said Claire told this story with such quiet composure, such practiced grief, that nobody had ever thought to question it. And when the wedding came around, and Preston explained that Claire had no family to walk her down the aisle or host a rehearsal dinner, Diane and Gordon had offered, out of what she genuinely believed was kindness, to stand in as a kind of adopted family for the ceremony. Diane used the words family friends acting as parents, like it was a generous gift she'd given a girl with nobody left. I stood in that driveway, and I let her finish every word before I said the only thing I came to say. "Ma'am," I said, "I've got a hardware store back in Cedar Falls, Iowa, that's been open since 1961. I raised that girl myself, along with her mother, who we buried 2 years ago this November, not in a car accident, but in a hospital bed, holding my hand. I've called Claire every week of her life until about 3 years ago. I don't know what she's told you, but I am not dead, and neither was my wife until cancer took her, and I would very much like you to know that before you stand up in a room and accept an honor that belongs to somebody else." Diane Ashcroft went very pale, standing there on her own driveway in the August sun, and she said, barely above a whisper, "Gordon needs to hear this." I told her I'd say it to him myself, whenever they were ready to hear it, and that I wasn't looking to ruin anybody's Saturday. just to make sure the truth had a way of finding its way into that room eventually, in whatever form made the most sense. I drove home to Cedar Falls that night with the windows down the whole way through Illinois, because I needed the noise of the road to keep me from thinking too hard about what I'd just set in motion. I sat Danny down at my kitchen table 3 nights later and told him the whole thing, start to finish. He listened, without interrupting, the way his mother used to, hands folded, jaw tight. When I finished, he asked me 4 words. What do you need? I told him I needed to be at that wedding, not sneaking in through a side door. Standing in the room, invited, in front of everyone. So there was no version of this where Claire could pretend afterward that it had simply slipped her mind. Danny thought about that for a good long while, and then he said, then we need an invitation that isn't from her. We drove down to Chicago together, 2 weekends before the wedding, and this time we went to see Preston Hale directly at his office, because Danny's argument was simple. Preston deserved to know exactly what he was marrying into before he said his vows in front of 200 people, and if he was an honest man, he would want to know, and if he wasn't, we'd learn that too, and either way, the truth would be standing in that room, whether Claire liked it or not. Preston Hale was younger than I expected, maybe 34, with the kind of handshake that's been practiced in a mirror. We sat in a glass-walled conference room, and I told him the same thing I'd told Diane Ashcroft on her driveway, plain and unhurried. I watched his face while I talked, and I want to tell you, whatever else that young man is, he is not a fool. He asked sharp questions. He asked for documentation, which I had, because I'd brought Ruth's death certificate and our marriage license and photographs going back 40 years. The kind of proof a man carries when he's worried nobody will believe the truth over a well-told lie. When I finished, Preston sat very still for a long moment, and then he said something I didn't expect. He said, I need to think about what kind of marriage I'm walking into, before I decide what kind of confrontation I'm walking into. He didn't promise me anything that day, but he didn't throw me out either, and 3 days later he called me himself, on my own phone, and said 4 words that told me everything. I want you there. He didn't invite me to hide. He invited me to the rehearsal dinner. The very dinner where Gordon and Diane Ashcroft were set to be formally welcomed as the bride's parents, standing in a hotel ballroom outside Chicago, in front of both families and half the wedding party. The 2 weeks before that dinner were the longest of my life. I pressed my one good suit, the navy one I'd worn to Ruth's funeral, because some part of me liked the symmetry of it, burying one thing and standing up for another in the same clothes. Danny drove down with me the morning of, and we didn't talk much on the drive, just the radio low and the cornfields going by, county after county, until Iowa turned into Illinois, and the fields turned into the outskirts of a city neither of us had any business feeling nervous about. We checked into a hotel 3 miles from the venue. That evening, I put on that navy suit, and Danny straightened my tie in the hotel mirror the way I used to straighten his before his own wedding, and neither one of us said much, because there wasn't much left to say that we hadn't already said in the truck 100 times over the last 2 weeks. The rehearsal dinner was held in a ballroom with the kind of chandeliers that make a man from Cedar Falls feel like he's wandered onto a movie set. Preston had arranged for us to arrive slightly late, after the room had settled, after the toasts to the happy couple had already started, because timing, he said, mattered more than almost anything else that night. I heard Claire's laugh before I saw her, that particular bright social laugh she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party even before anyone's sure it is one. She was standing near the head table in a pale green dress, glowing the way a bride is supposed to glow, with Gordon Ashcroft's arm linked loosely through hers on one side and Diane close on the other, the three of them arranged like a photograph that had already been taken 1,000 times in Claire's head before tonight ever happened. Danny and I came in through the side door Preston had shown us earlier, and we stood near the back for just a moment while the room caught up to what was happening. I watched my daughter's face when she saw us. I want to tell you honestly, neighbor, I've thought about that look more times than I can count since. It wasn't confusion, not at first. It was the look of a woman doing very fast arithmetic, trying to find an explanation that could survive the next 60 seconds. Preston stood up at the head table, tapped his glass with a spoon, that clean, small sound that tells a room to go quiet, and the room did. He said he wanted to say a few words before dinner was served, about family, about how a wedding is supposed to be a room full of the truth of who two people really are. Then he looked right at Claire, gently, not cruelly, and he said he thought it was time the room met her actual father, a man named Walter Kowalski, who had driven 5 hours from Cedar Falls, Iowa, and had been sitting quietly in the back, waiting to be introduced properly for the first time in 3 years. I have never in my life felt a room go as still as that one did. Claire's face lost every bit of color it had. Diane Ashcroft's hand found Gordon's arm, and I watched the two of them go rigid in a way that told me they'd already decided, sometime in the last 2 weeks, exactly how they'd behave if this moment ever came. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I walked to the front of that room slowly, the way you'd walk towards something you've been circling for a long time, and I looked at my daughter, who had not looked me in the eye in longer than I wanted to admit, and I said, "Claire, your mother has been gone 2 years, this coming November. I buried her myself, in the ground, at Riverside Cemetery, 30 miles from the kitchen table where I raised you. She did not die in a car accident, and I am not the aunt's memory of a dead man. I am standing right here, in a suit I wore to her funeral, because some part of me thought it was fitting to wear it here too." Somebody near the back gasped, soft, involuntary. Claire's mouth opened, and nothing came out. I turned to the Ashcrofts, and I kept my voice even, because there was no need to raise it. The truth doesn't require volume. It only requires saying, "Gordon, Diane, I know what my daughter told you. I know it was a kind thing you thought you were doing, standing in for two people you believed were gone. I don't fault you for believing a story told well. But I am asking you now, in front of this room, to sit back down, because there is nothing for you to formally welcome here that belongs to you." Diane Ashcroft's eyes went wet, and Gordon, to his credit, was already stepping back from Claire's side before I'd finished the sentence, the way a man does when he realizes he's been standing somewhere he never should have been asked to stand. I looked back at Claire one last time. She had tears running down her face now, real ones, and I want you to know, neighbor, I did not enjoy seeing that. Not one bit of me enjoyed it, because I had spent 62 years learning that there is no version of watching your child cry that feels like a victory. "I didn't drive 5 hours to ruin your wedding," I told her. "I drove 5 hours because somewhere along the way, you decided I was easier to erase than to explain, and I needed you to understand that erasing a person doesn't make the truth disappear. It just makes the truth arrive later, and louder, and in a room full of people." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the one thing I'd brought with me besides the paperwork. A small photograph from Claire's high school graduation, her standing between me and Ruth, all three of us squinting into the sun outside Cedar Falls High School. I set it down gently on the table in front of her, no drama in the motion, just set it down the way you'd lay something to rest. "In case you forgot what real looks like," I said. Then Danny stepped up beside me, put a hand on my shoulder, and we walked out of that ballroom together, past 200 faces that had just watched the truth walk in, wearing a 5-hour drive and a Navy funeral suit. We didn't stay to see what happened after. Preston told me later, over the phone, 3 days after he'd made the only decision a man in his position could make, that the wedding never happened. He said he couldn't marry a woman who had built her entire adult life on the bones of people who weren't even dead, especially not the people who'd actually loved her the most. He said it wasn't really about the lie itself, not by the end. It was about what kind of person builds a lie that large and keeps building it, brick by brick, for years, rather than simply saying, "My father owns a hardware store in Iowa, and I haven't called him enough, and I don't know how to fix that." Gordon Ashcroft called me a week later, an actual phone call, not an email, and apologized for a mistake he said he was ashamed of making. I told him there wasn't anything to apologize for. Kindness offered to a lie is still kindness. It's just misdirected, and now it's been redirected to where it was always supposed to go. Danny and I drove home that night the same way. We'd driven down, radio low, fields going by in the dark, but it felt different on the way back, lighter somehow, the way a barn feels once you've finally torn out the rotten beam you've been working around for years. I still think about Claire most days. I keep that porch swing oiled, and the third Sunday of every month still smells like pot roast, because some habits are prayers you keep saying even after you're not sure anyone's still listening. I don't know if she'll ever call, but I know this much. Whatever room she stands in from here on out, she'll stand in it as herself. Because I made sure of that. And there's a version of fatherhood that looks like that too. Not the version where everything ends wrapped up neat. The version where you simply refuse, one more time, to let your child disappear you before you're ready to go. If this story found you tonight, friend, and it stirred up something in your own chest about a son or a daughter who's drifted further than you'd like, do an old man a favor and tell me where you're watching from down in the comments. Give this one a like if it meant something to you, and stick around, because I've got more of these true stories to tell you, and I suspect a few of them will feel a little like home. Sometimes love doesn't disappear, it just waits, patient as a porch swing left oiled through winter. A name can be erased from a website, but it can't be erased from a life that raised you. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to walk through the door and take a seat. And if there's still someone waiting on your call, that door hasn't closed yet. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to carry a positive life lesson along with it.